Clara's fingers hovered over her phone, her thumb poised to send a quick message to her best friend. It had been a long day, rain dripping down the window pane, the streets glowing with the yellow light of old lampposts. She had just finished making a cup of tea and settled into the worn armchair by the window, hoping for a quiet evening. A short text would be harmless, she thought, just a small joke to make her friend laugh. But her mind was distracted. Bills had piled up. Her boss had been impossible, and she had a long list of errands to finish. She typed the message absent-mindedly, her eyes scanning the screen without reading carefully. "Hope your evening is less dramatic than mine," she wrote, followed by a laughing emoji. Satisfied, she hit send and immediately froze. A subtle feeling of dread rolled through her chest like a shadow brushing past her. That pause lasted only a second before she shrugged it off. It was late, she was tired, and surely nothing could go wrong from a silly text except she had not sent it to her friend. Minutes later, a low hum of engines reached her ears. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just the city traffic. But the sound grew heavier, darker, almost deliberate. She drew back the curtain, peering into the gray drizzle outside, and her heart skipped a beat. Black cars, sleek and imposing, were pulling up outside her apartment building. The engines cut off simultaneously, leaving a suffocating silence. Her fingers trembled as she backed away from the window. This was impossible. Who could possibly have sent black cars to her small, ordinary home? The rational part of her brain screamed to call the police, to hide somewhere safe, to lock every door and never speak to anyone again. Then her phone buzzed. A single message, not from her friend, not from anyone she knew. "We need to meet now." No name, no explanation. Just those 3 chilling words. Clara stared at the screen, frozen. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She had heard stories about people who had angered the wrong person, stories about men whose power reached far beyond the law, stories about shadows that could move faster than light. She had never believed them, until now. The first knock at her door shattered her thoughts. Not a timid knock, but a heavy, deliberate rap that demanded attention. Her mind screamed at her to hide, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. Another knock followed, firmer, and a deep, calm voice called out from the other side. "Miss Clara, Adrian Volkov requests your presence." Her stomach lurched. That name, it had been whispered in dark corners of the city, murmured with a mix of fear and awe. Adrian Volkov, the man whose name alone could silence a room, whose empire stretched farther than anyone dared to imagine. And now, he wanted her. Clara's hand shook as she looked at the door. Should she run? Could she run? The thought of the black cars outside made that choice impossible. Her apartment, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. She drew in a shaky breath and with trembling fingers unlocked the door. Outside, standing like a shadow carved from midnight, was a man in a perfectly tailored suit. His hair was dark, his eyes sharper than knives, and yet there was something magnetic in the way he moved. An effortless power that made the rain seem like it had stopped just for him. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply waited, and Clara felt herself drawn to him against her will. "Step outside," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. It was not a command. It was something heavier, something that left her no choice but to obey. Clara stepped into the rain, the cold droplets soaking her hair and clinging to her skin. The black cars waited silently, engines off, doors open. The man gestured toward one of them. "Get in." Her heart pounded, but she could not explain why. Terror mingled with a strange excitement she had never felt before. With a cautious glance, she slid into the car, the door shutting with a soft, final click behind her. The car moved with smooth precision, the city blurring past the rain-streaked windows. Silence filled the space, but it was not empty. It was heavy, like the pause before a storm breaks. Clara stole glances at the man seated beside her. Adrian Volkov, the man whose name had been whispered with fear. He said nothing, but his presence filled the car as if the darkness itself had taken human form. After several minutes that felt like hours, he spoke. Not a question, not a greeting, just a statement. "Do you know why you are here?" Clara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I sent a message to the wrong person." He raised a single brow as if her explanation amused him. "A message," he repeated, the words slow, deliberate. "And that message brought you to me." Clara swallowed, realizing that in this world words could be more dangerous than weapons. Didn't mean to. He held up a hand, cutting her off. Intentions do not matter. Actions do. His eyes, dark and unyielding, seemed to pierce through her. She could feel him examining her, weighing her, testing her courage. For reasons she could not understand, she did not look away. Something in her chest stirred, a mix of fear and curiosity, the kind of curiosity that drew moths to flame despite knowing they might burn. The car stopped before a tall, iron gate, set against the backdrop of the city's foggy skyline. Beyond the gates lay a mansion like something out of a storybook, but darker, grander, terrifying. Black stone, high towers, lights that gleamed like stars trapped in metal. The air itself seemed heavier here, thick with power and history. The man gestured for her to follow, and she did, despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. He led her through the halls, opulent and cold, until they reached a room bathed in shadow and candlelight. The warmth from the fire did little to ease the tension in the air. "You are far from home," Adrian said, his voice softer now, almost curious. "Do you understand what it means to step into my world?" Clara shook her head, suddenly very aware of how small and ordinary she felt compared to him. "No," she admitted, voice trembling. I didn't know it would be like this." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Few ever do." The silence stretched, the crackle of fire the only sound between them. Clara felt a strange pull toward him, a force she could not explain. Fear, yes, but something else, something magnetic and terrifying. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "You sent the message." "A mistake," he said, almost to himself. "Yet here you are." "Fate has curious ways of weaving paths, Miss Clara." She shivered, not from the cold but from the weight of his presence, the way his words seemed to echo in her very soul. I don't know what to say," she whispered. He smiled faintly, the first hint of emotion she had seen, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You do not need to say anything. You only need to decide." Clara's heart raced. Decide? Decide what? The thought of leaving this place, returning to her ordinary life, suddenly felt impossible. And yet staying here, what did that even mean? He rose, tall and commanding, and walked to the window. Rain streaked down the glass, and he looked out at the city as if weighing its secrets. "You may leave now and forget this night ever happened," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Or you may stay and see what lies beyond the world you know." Clara's mind raced. Fear battled curiosity. Terror battled a strange fascination she could not name. Her fingers twitched, her heart pounded, and yet, a part of her longed to understand, to see, to feel the danger and the power all at once. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, "I want to understand." Adrian turned, eyes locking onto hers, and for the first time the shadowed mansion seemed to shift, as if recognizing her choice. "Very well," he said, a hint of something almost like approval in his tone. "Then let us see where this night leads." Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, a quiet storm of anticipation, fear, and something far more dangerous, curiosity, took hold. And Clara realized that nothing, not even her wildest fears, could prepare her for what lay ahead. The night had begun. Clara followed Adrian through the mansion's dark corridors, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished stone floors. The walls were lined with heavy tapestries, shadows twisting in the flickering candlelight. Every step made her heart race, a mixture of fear and fascination she could not explain. She had never been in a place like this before. The air smelled faintly of smoke and expensive wood, an aroma that felt both dangerous and intoxicating. Adrian led her into a room at the heart of the mansion. It was vast, almost cavernous, with high ceilings that disappeared into darkness. A single chandelier cast dim light over a large desk cluttered with papers and objects she could not recognize. On the far side, tall windows framed the city's skyline, wet and blurred from the rain outside. He gestured for her to sit. Clara obeyed, sinking into a chair that seemed too large for her small frame. Adrian remained standing, his presence filling the room like a shadow that could not be escaped. "You are far from your world," he said quietly, eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you understand the choice you've made by coming here?" Clara's hands fidgeted in her lap. I don't really know. I thought I was just curious. But now—" She paused, unsure how to explain the jumble of fear and fascination building inside her. "Now I feel like I've stepped into another life." Adrian studied her for a moment as if weighing every word and gesture. Life has many paths, he said slowly. Some are safe, some are dangerous, and some are unavoidable. Clara looked at him, noticing for the first time the subtle intensity in his expression. There was power there, yes, but also loneliness, a quiet pain beneath the surface. She had expected only fear, yet she could not look away. You should leave, he said finally, his voice calm but carrying a weight she could feel in her bones. You could return to your world. Forget this night. Forget me. And yet something in his gaze made her hesitate. The fear that had gripped her moments ago was now tangled with a strange, compelling curiosity. She felt drawn toward him, like a moth to a flame she could not resist. I can't leave, she admitted, her voice trembling. Not yet. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Good, he said softly. Then you will see the truth of my world. For the next hour he spoke little, letting her take in the mansion, its secrets, its quiet dangers. He showed her a study filled with books on law, politics, and human behavior, a room that served as a small armory, and a balcony overlooking the city, where rain fell like silver threads through the night. Clara tried to take it all in, feeling the weight of a life far removed from her own, a life she had never imagined but could not stop imagining now. You are afraid, Adrian said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, measured, almost a whisper, yet it filled the space. Clara nodded, unable to deny it. I am, she admitted. But I also feel something else. I can't explain it. Curiosity, he said, stepping closer. Or perhaps desire. You are drawn to danger, even as it terrifies you. That is natural, but be careful. Her pulse quickened. There was something hypnotic about the way he spoke, the way he moved. Every gesture, every word seemed deliberate, powerful, almost magnetic. She wanted to look away, to retreat, but a part of her refused. I don't want to be afraid, she whispered. Adrian studied her for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. Fear is not weakness, he said finally. It is a guide. It tells you what matters most. And in this world, what matters most is survival and loyalty. Clara shivered, realizing the weight of his words. This was not a world she could navigate lightly. Every action had consequences. Every word could tip the balance between safety and danger. Yet she did not want to leave. She could not. As the night deepened, Adrian led her to a smaller room at the end of a hallway. It was simple compared to the rest of the mansion, furnished with just a few chairs and a small table. The air felt heavier here, almost charged, as if the walls themselves held secrets. You must understand, he said, seating himself across from her, that entering my world is not a game. You may believe you are safe, that your choices are yours alone, but they are not. Here, your actions touch lives, change outcomes, and awaken forces you do not yet comprehend. Clara listened, trying to absorb the weight of his words. She had always believed life was simple: work, home, friends, small joys and small worries. This was something else entirely. Why are you letting me see this? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Adrian leaned back, his gaze distant for a moment. Because, he said slowly, even I do not exist without witnesses. Even power, even darkness is empty if no one knows it. He paused, eyes returning to hers. And perhaps, I am curious about you. Clara felt her stomach tighten. She had expected danger, fear, perhaps even anger. But curiosity? Something in his tone suggested more. Something unspoken, something personal. She tried to hide the flutter in her chest, but she knew he noticed. The sound of a door opening elsewhere in the mansion broke the moment. A guard entered, bowing slightly. Sir, everything is ready for the meeting tomorrow. The rivals have moved, and the city watches in silence. Adrian nodded without looking. Very well, he said, then turned his attention back to Clara. Do you see now what it means to step into this life? You are not safe, and you will never be safe. Yet here you are. Clara swallowed hard. The thrill of danger, the pull of curiosity, the tension between fear and fascination, it was overwhelming. She realized that leaving was no longer a choice she could make without regret. For the first time, Adrian allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to appear. You have courage, he said. Courage is rare, but do not mistake courage for readiness. Tomorrow will test you. Test me? Clara asked, heart hammering. Yes, he said, voice low and deliberate. Not only your mind but your spirit. You will face choices that could cost you more than comfort, more than safety, and through it you will see who you truly are. And who I truly am. Her chest tightened, a mix of fear and anticipation. The idea of being tested, of stepping further into his world, should have terrified her. And yet she could not deny the spark of excitement. The night had already changed her, and she knew there was no turning back. Adrian stood and moved to the window again, looking out at the city below. The rain reflected the lights like 1,000 scattered diamonds. He did not speak for several minutes, letting the quiet stretch between them. Clara watched him, noticing the small details, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flickered over the streets, the silent weight of command he carried effortlessly. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow everything changes." His gaze fell on her, sharp and steady. "You will see the world as it truly is, and you will see me as I truly am. Prepare yourself." Clara nodded, though her mind was spinning. The mansion, the cars, the danger, it all felt like a dream. Yet the ache in her chest, the tightness in her stomach, the quickening of her pulse, it was real. The night stretched on, rain tapping against the windows, shadows moving like living things across the walls. Clara realized she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Fear, fascination, and an inexplicable pull toward Adrian had become entwined within her. As she settled into a chair by the fire, Adrian's final words echoed in her mind. Tomorrow, everything changes. Outside, the city slept under the rain, unaware of the storm that had just begun within the walls of a dark mansion. Inside, Clara understood one undeniable truth. Her life was no longer her own. And in the quiet tension of the night, a seed of something dangerous and irresistible had been planted. Morning came with a gray, uneasy light that seeped through the tall windows of Adrian Volkov's mansion. Clara woke with a start, the memory of last night pressing heavily against her mind. The mansion, so grand and dark, had felt like a world apart from anything she had known. Yet now, as the rain eased and the streets outside slowly came to life, she knew there was no turning back. She had chosen to stay. She dressed quickly, her fingers trembling slightly as she fastened buttons and smoothed her hair. Every sound in the mansion seemed louder than it should be. The soft padding of servants' feet, the distant rumble of cars, even the wind brushing against the stone walls. She was beginning to understand that Adrian's world was alive with constant movement and quiet power, and she was only just stepping into it. When she entered the main hall, Adrian was already waiting. He stood near a window, his dark silhouette framed against the soft morning light. His posture was perfectly straight, his hands clasped behind him, and yet there was a subtle tension that made him seem almost alive with restrained energy. "You are ready," he said simply, turning to face her. His gaze was sharp, assessing as if weighing every thought she had yet to speak. Clara swallowed and nodded. I think so." "Think?" His single word was calm but carried weight. "You will need more than thinking in my world. You will need instinct, courage, and clarity. Are you prepared to act, even when the consequences are unknown?" She hesitated for a moment, fear threatening to take hold. But then she remembered the pull she had felt last night, the strange fascination that had drawn her into his shadowed world. She took a deep breath. "I will try," she said. Adrian's expression softened just slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Good," he said. "Then let us begin." He led her through the mansion, down staircases that twisted like spirals, and into a smaller, secure room filled with maps, files, and screens showing streets and locations across the city. Clara's eyes widened. This was the operational heart of Adrian's empire. Every move, every contact, every threat, everything passed through this room. And now she was standing in it. "You will assist me," Adrian explained, his voice low, deliberate. "Not with what you think. Not with danger you cannot comprehend. But your role will be important. You will see the world, yes, but you will also shape it in ways you do not yet understand." Clara's pulse quickened. She had expected to watch, to listen, maybe to hide behind a corner, but now she realized she was being entrusted with a responsibility that carried real risk. Her fear surged, but so did a strange, undeniable thrill. "What exactly do I do?" she asked cautiously. Adrian handed her a folder with a single name and several notes. "You observe. You report. You do not interfere unless instructed. Your role is small, but your presence is essential." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of the papers in her hands. Each word, each instruction, was a step deeper into a world she had never imagined, and a world where every misstep could carry consequences she could not predict. They moved in silence through the mansion until they reached a garage, where sleek black cars waited like silent predators. Adrian gestured for her to get into one of them. She hesitated only a moment before sliding into the leather seat, the cool surface sending a shiver through her. Adrian took the driver's seat. The car moved through the city with precision, gliding past wet streets and dim alleyways. Clara peered through the window, trying to memorize every detail. She had never seen the city this way, so alive, so tense, so full of shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe. "You are learning," Adrian said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Notice everything. The city is alive, but it hides as much as it reveals. Every choice has meaning. Every moment carries risk." Clara nodded, her mind working to keep pace. I think I understand." "You will need more than thinking," he said again, voice low and deliberate. "You will need instinct. Trust it. Trust yourself." They arrived at a small, nondescript building. Adrian parked the car and she realized she had no idea what awaited her inside. The moment they stepped into the building, Clara felt the shift in energy. Silent, tense, almost electric. Guards and attendants moved with precision, acknowledging Adrian with subtle nods. Inside a large room, she saw men and women engaged in quiet but focused activity. Discussions, calls, planning. Clara felt both fear and awe. This was a world of power and she was in the center of it. Adrian leaned closer. "Watch carefully, listen, learn. You will see why every decision matters." Hours passed in tense observation. Clara recorded details, memorized names, and noticed how Adrian interacted with others. His authority was absolute, yet there were moments of subtle kindness, brief gestures that revealed a man shaped by both power and loss. She began to see that beneath the ruthless exterior, there was someone who understood responsibility in ways most could never imagine. During a break, Adrian handed her a small cup of tea. She sipped it cautiously, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. He watched her silently, and for a fleeting moment the walls of danger seemed to soften. "You are different from the others," he said quietly. "Curiosity alone is not enough. You have courage, but you must temper it with caution. The world you see is not forgiving." Clara's fingers tightened around the cup. I don't want to fail." "You will face challenges," Adrian said. "You may falter, but even failure teaches. Even fear teaches. What matters is not perfection, but resilience, and you have resilience." The hours stretched into evening and the tension only grew. Clara was exhausted, yet she could not stop observing, learning, feeling the pulse of Adrian's world. Every interaction, every glance, every command carried meaning she was only beginning to understand. Finally, Adrian dismissed her for the night, but not without a warning. "Tomorrow the real test begins. You will be asked to act, to decide, to risk, and through it you will see who you truly are and perhaps who I truly am." Clara nodded, her mind still racing. She returned to the mansion, her room feeling smaller than before, the walls closing in with the weight of anticipation. She lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day. Fear mingled with excitement, terror with fascination. She could not deny that a part of her longed to see what came next, to be drawn deeper into Adrian's shadowed world. As she drifted into a restless sleep, the mansion around her seemed alive with whispers, the city outside shimmering with rain-soaked secrets. She realized that she was no longer an observer. She was part of the story, part of the danger, the intrigue, and the unexpected pull that Adrian Volkov exerted over her heart and mind. In the quiet of the night, she could almost hear his voice in her thoughts. Tomorrow everything changes, and Clara knew, deep in her chest, that her life would never be the same. She was no longer just Clara, the ordinary woman with an ordinary life. She was someone who had crossed a threshold into a world of shadows, power, and impossible choices. And though fear still gripped her, a strange thrill ran alongside it. The thrill of being seen, tested, and perhaps changed forever. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city pulsed with life and quiet danger, unaware of the storm that had begun inside a dark mansion. Inside, Clara lay awake, her mind alive with anticipation. She had taken her first steps, but the path ahead was longer, darker, and far more dangerous than she could imagine. And yet, she would follow. The morning air was sharp, crisp with the promise of rain that had yet to fall. Clara sat at the edge of the mansion's balcony, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, trying to steady the nerves that had kept her awake most of the night. She could see the city stretching out below her, streets glistening in the early light, unaware of the quiet storm that had taken hold within the walls of Adrian Volkov's mansion. Adrian appeared beside her without a sound, as if he had always been there. His presence was steady, commanding and yet somehow comforting. He leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon, and Clara felt the familiar pull, the mix of fear, fascination, and something she could not yet name. "You are ready," he said, not looking at her but speaking as if he could see into her thoughts. "Today is different. Today you act. You no longer observe, you participate. The city will test you, and so will I." Clara nodded, heart hammering. She had expected a day of quiet observation, learning about Adrian's empire from the safety of the mansion. But now she understood that her role was shifting. Fear mingled with a thrill she could not deny. What will I do?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "You will go to the docks," Adrian said, his tone calm, precise. "A shipment has been intercepted by rivals. You will accompany me. You will watch, listen, and act if necessary. Your instincts will guide you. Trust them." Clara's stomach tightened. The docks were notorious, dangerous, and unpredictable, but she also felt the strange, exhilarating pull she always felt when Adrian spoke. She had chosen this path. She would not step back now. The drive to the docks was quiet, the black cars gliding through the streets like predators moving in silence. Clara kept her eyes on the passing buildings, trying to memorize every detail, every alley, every shadow. She could feel the tension in Adrian's posture, the alertness in his gaze. He was calm, but she knew he was ready for anything, always prepared for danger. When they arrived, the docks were alive with movement. Workers shifted crates, their voices low, unaware of the presence of danger. Ships rocked gently in the water, their metal hulls creaking in the morning breeze. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. This world, so ordinary in appearance, was alive with quiet threats she could not yet fully understand. Adrian led her to a vantage point, a small platform overlooking the shipping yard. From here, Clara could see the rival gang, a group of men moving with practiced precision, confident in their territory. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, studying their movements, noting every detail with exacting focus. "You see them," he said quietly. "Every gesture, every glance, every misstep matters. You are no longer safe. You are part of the calculation, do not forget that." Clara nodded, trying to keep her fear in check. She observed the men, noting their positions, their weapons, their subtle signals. She realized how precise Adrian's world was, how danger was woven into every motion, every decision, and she felt a surge of pride and fear. She was learning to see, to understand, to anticipate. Suddenly a shout rang out. One of the rival men had spotted a small group of Adrian's associates moving among the crates. Tension snapped through the air like a live wire. Clara's heart leapt. She had been warned, but nothing could prepare her for the sudden rush of fear and adrenaline. Adrian's hand rested lightly on her arm, grounding her. "Watch, observe, only act if necessary," he whispered. The rival men began to move toward the shipment, their intentions clear. Clara could see the potential for violence, the delicate balance of power teetering on a knife's edge. She felt her pulse racing, her breath coming fast, yet she did not look away. She had been drawn into this world, and now she could not escape it. Then one of the rival men stepped too close to the edge of a dock, losing his balance. Without thinking, Clara shouted a warning. "Watch out!" Adrian's eyes flicked to her, sharp and intense, but there was no anger, only acknowledgement. The man regained his footing, none the wiser to her intervention. Yet in that moment, Clara felt the surge of something powerful. Agency, impact, the realization that her choices mattered here. The confrontation escalated quickly. Rival men moved closer, and Adrian's team responded with precise, controlled action. Clara watched, heart pounding, as strategy and instinct collided in real time. She realized that every moment in this world demanded courage, and every decision carried weight beyond measure. Adrian moved with effortless precision, his presence commanding the scene. Yet Clara noticed something else. Moments of subtle care, brief gestures that spoke of a man who valued not only control, but trust, loyalty, and courage. And she felt herself drawn to him, not just in fear or fascination, but in a way that touched something deeper inside her. As the confrontation reached its peak, a crate shifted dangerously, threatening to topple onto one of Adrian's associates. Without hesitation, Clara moved, steadying the crate just in time. The man looked at her with a mixture of surprise and respect, but Adrian's eyes held something deeper. "You acted," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the tension-filled air. "You chose to act when it mattered. That is what separates observation from participation." Clara's chest heaved with relief and pride. She had faced danger, made a choice, and survived. And in that moment, she realized that the pull she felt toward Adrian was more than fascination. It was connection, trust, and perhaps the beginnings of something more profound. The rival men retreated, their plans thwarted, leaving Adrian's associates to secure the shipment. Clara exhaled slowly, the tension in her body finally beginning to ease. She had survived her first test. She had seen the stakes, felt the danger, and acted with courage. Adrian walked to her side, his gaze steady and unreadable. "You performed well," he said. "But do not mistake this for safety. Danger will return. It always does. And your choices will always matter." Clara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had stepped into his world, faced its dangers, and survived. But she also knew that this was only the beginning. As they returned to the mansion, the city passing by in a blur of lights and shadows, Clara felt a shift within herself. She was no longer the woman who had accidentally sent a message to the wrong number. She was someone who had acted under pressure, who had faced fear, who had begun to understand the complex dance of power, loyalty, and courage that defined Adrian's world. When they arrived, Adrian led her to a small room overlooking the city. The rain had returned, streaking the windows with silver threads. He stood silently for a moment, watching the streets below. Clara felt the weight of the moment, the quiet after action, the reflection before the next challenge. "You are changing," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "You see more, feel more, understand more. But this is only the beginning. You will be tested again, and the next test will demand more than courage. It will demand insight, intuition, and trust." Clara met his gaze, feeling the intensity of his eyes, the unspoken understanding that they were now bound in ways that went beyond ordinary life. I am ready," she said, though a part of her knew she could not fully anticipate what was coming. Adrian nodded, almost imperceptibly approving. "Good. Remember this feeling, the tension, the fear, the thrill. It will guide you when the choices are impossible and the consequences unavoidable." Clara turned her eyes to the city, feeling the weight of her journey. She had survived her first test. She had acted, made choices, and felt the dangerous pull of Adrian Volkov's world. And in the quiet reflection of the moment, she realized that her life had changed forever. But as she watched the rain streak across the glass, a subtle unease settled in her chest. Danger was never far from Adrian's world, and she knew that the next challenge would be even greater. She could not yet see what lay ahead, but the pull of curiosity, courage, and the unspoken bond with Adrian would carry her forward. In the étui, quiet of the mansion, amidst shadows and candlelight, Clara understood one undeniable truth. The world she had stepped into was vast, dangerous, and alive with possibility, and she could not turn back, for the path ahead was already chosen. Tomorrow the real test awaits. she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of anticipation settle over her. And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it. Not as the woman who had sent a careless message, but as someone who had begun to understand the power, danger, and unexpected connection that now defined her life. The night was heavy with rain, the city streets glowing with wet reflections of neon and streetlights. Clara sat quietly in the mansion, her hands clasped in her lap, trying to steady the whirlwind of thoughts and feelings that had followed her all day. The confrontation at the docks had left her heart racing, her mind alive with adrenaline, and yet she knew that the real challenge was yet to come. Adrian had been calm, almost distant, but she sensed the tension underlying his every movement. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Adrian entered without invitation, his presence commanding the room even in the dim candlelight. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, Clara felt the familiar pull, a mixture of fear, fascination, and something deeper she could not name. "The rivals will strike tonight," he said, voice low and steady. "They have regrouped, and this time they will come with more than men. You must be prepared, not just to observe, but to act decisively." Clara's stomach tightened. She had survived observation in her first test, but this was different. The thought of being in the midst of danger, fully responsible for her actions, made her chest ache with tension. And yet, she felt a strange thrill, the pull of being part of Adrian's world, part of something larger, something alive with power and risk. I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will do whatever is necessary." Adrian nodded, a faint shadow of approval crossing his face. "Good. Courage alone will not suffice tonight. You will need clarity, intuition, and trust. Trust in your instincts, and in me." They moved through the mansion in silence, the usual shadows seeming heavier, more alive, as if the building itself anticipated the coming storm. Clara's mind raced, reviewing every detail she had observed at the docks, every movement, every possible outcome. She realized that fear had become a tool, something to sharpen her focus, to guide her choices. When they reached the garage, the black cars waited, silent and imposing. Clara stepped inside, her hands gripping the edges of her seat as the engine hummed to life. Adrian's presence beside her was steadying, yet she felt the same pull she always did, a dangerous, magnetic energy that both terrified and exhilarated her. The drive through the rain-slicked streets was quiet, save for the soft hum of tires against asphalt. Clara peered through the window, noticing every shadow, every alley, every flicker of movement. She understood now that this world was alive, constantly shifting, and that every decision carried weight beyond imagination. At the docks, the tension was immediate. Rival men moved with silent precision, their eyes sharp, their gestures calculated. Clara felt the weight of her first real test pressing down on her. But this time the stakes were higher, the danger closer. She followed Adrian's lead, observing, anticipating, and preparing to act. Suddenly a figure stepped forward from the shadows, blocking one of Adrian's associates. The man's intentions were clear, violent, and immediate. Clara's heart leapt, fear threatening to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to focus. She saw the movement, the subtle shifts, the gaps that could be exploited. Without hesitation, she acted. She grabbed a nearby crate, using it to create a barrier and protect the associate. The man stumbled, giving Adrian the opening he needed to move with precise, controlled force. Clara's hand shook, but she did not stop. She realized that she was no longer just an observer. She was part of the action, part of the strategy, part of the outcome. The confrontation escalated, shadows and motion blending into a dangerous dance. Clara's mind worked quickly, her instincts guiding her, her courage carrying her through the tension. She felt the same pull toward Adrian, but now it was entwined with the thrill of survival and the responsibility of choice. Adrian moved beside her with silent precision, protecting, guiding, and directing with a calm authority that both intimidated and fascinated her. Clara could see the subtle ways he valued trust and loyalty, the brief gestures that revealed a man shaped not only by power, but by understanding, by recognition of courage, by careful judgment of character. Finally, the rival men retreated, their plan thwarted, leaving Adrian's team to secure the shipment. Clara exhaled slowly, her body trembling from the intensity of the night. She had acted decisively, faced danger head-on, and survived. She felt a strange sense of pride, but also a deep awareness of the cost, the vigilance, the tension, the constant risk that defined Adrian's world. Adrian turned to her, his eyes dark and unreadable, yet softer than she had ever seen. "You have performed admirably," he said. "Tonight you did more than act, you chose courage when hesitation could have been easier. That is rare. That is strength." Clara's chest ached with relief and exhaustion. I couldn't have done it without your guidance," she admitted, her voice low. "I was afraid, but somehow I felt I could act because you were there." Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Clara felt as if he could see every fear, every thought, every spark of courage inside her. Finally he spoke, his voice low, deliberate, carrying an intensity that made her heart race. "You have proven yourself, but this is only the beginning. The world we inhabit is vast, dangerous, and full of choices that cannot be undone." Clara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had crossed thresholds she could never return from, faced dangers she had never imagined, and begun to see the depths of Adrian's power, and perhaps the depths of herself. The rain continued to fall as they returned to the mansion, the city shimmering like a web of lights and shadows. Clara felt a shift within herself, a growing strength, a deeper understanding of courage, trust, and the strange connection she felt with Adrian. Fear and fascination had transformed into something more profound, something that carried both responsibility and undeniable attraction. When they reached the mansion, Adrian led her to a quiet room overlooking the city. Candlelight flickered across the walls, shadows dancing like spirits in the night. Clara sank into a chair, exhausted yet alert, her mind replaying every moment, every choice, every heartbeat of the night. Adrian stood silently, looking out over the city. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You have changed tonight. You have faced danger, made choices, and acted with courage. But understand this, the path ahead will demand more. Loyalty, insight, and trust will be tested again, and the bond we share will face its own trials." Clara met his gaze, her chest tightening. I understand," she whispered. She realized in that moment that her connection to Adrian went beyond fascination, beyond fear, beyond curiosity. There was trust, there was reliance, and something deeper, an unspoken bond forged in the heat of danger and shared understanding. Adrian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. "You are no longer the woman who sent a careless message," he said softly. "You are someone who has stepped into my world, faced its dangers, and emerged stronger. And that is rare." Clara's breath caught. The words carried weight, not just acknowledgement, but something more, a recognition of her courage, her growth, her place in his world. She realized that she had not only survived, but she had earned a part in the story, a place where her actions mattered, and where she mattered. The rain outside slowed, the city quieting under the night sky. Clara felt a calm settle within her, a quiet understanding that the journey was not over, but that she was ready. She had faced danger, made choices, and discovered a courage she had never known. And most importantly, she had begun to understand the complex, magnetic, and powerful connection she shared with Adrian. He reached out, a simple gesture, and for the first time, Clara felt the full weight of their bond. It was not just fear or fascination. It was trust, respect, and the beginnings of something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. "You have earned this night," Adrian said quietly, "and whatever comes next, we face it together. Danger, choice, consequence, and perhaps understanding." Clara nodded, feeling a sense of completion mixed with anticipation. The night had tested her courage, her instincts, and her resolve. She had faced the shadows, acted decisively, and discovered the strength within herself. And now, as the rain fell softly outside, she realized that the journey had transformed her, not just as an observer, but as someone who belonged in Adrian Volkov's world, someone who had begun to understand the power of trust, courage, and connection. For the first time since the message, since the black cars, since the whirlwind that had pulled her into this life, Clara felt a strange serenity. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. She had faced fear and choice, danger and action, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. Adrian remained by the window, a silent guardian, a presence both dangerous and protective. Clara knew that their journey was far from over, but she also knew that she would face whatever came next, not as the woman who had sent a simple message, but as someone who had embraced courage, trust, and the complex, thrilling world that Adrian Volkov commanded. And in the quiet of the mansion, amidst shadows and candlelight, Clara understood a truth she could not ignore. Life, danger, and connection were entwined, and she was finally ready to live fully within that storm. Outside, the city shimmered with rain and light, unaware of the storm that had shaped two lives within a dark mansion. "I